Howdy, howdy, folks. This is Acid Roots. I'm going to review the compilation album by Disturbing the Peace, Golden Grain. Now, this came out in 2002, basically just about 20 years old. This is kind of a stopgap between Ludacris releases. So, if you were wondering what he was up to after his Word of Mouth project, which was basically his most successful album, probably even today, that's his most successful, but kind of before he dropped Chicken and Beer with the hits Splash Waterfalls and Stand Up. This is kind of the in between where Ludacris was kind of in the midst of kind of having like a big climax the next year with some hits he did from 2003. This is before that song he did for Too Fast Too Furious. I forget what that song is called. Yeah, that hit song, like Ludacris had a number of hits from 2003. He had Pussy Poppin', Act a Fool from the Too Fast, Too Furious soundtrack, Stand Up, Splash Waterfalls, but this was kind of before that. This is kind of, or 2002 was kind of an awkward area for Ludacris just because he crested pretty well off of Word of Mouth from late 2001, but it kind of felt like he still needed something to kind of get his foot more in the door. And this is kind of a project that almost did it, but it's still relatively underwhelming. I feel like I definitely appreciated Ludacris's verses on here. He's the most interesting thing about this project. But unfortunately, he not only fails to deliver a hit single to help promote this project, but also the songs that kind of have him on there, I still don't feel like they're as scene stealing as I would have preferred them to be. You know, with all the leftover charisma that he had from Word of Mouth, it really felt like it felt like he had singles to spare on that project. Like he could have also dropped Freaky Things and Growing Pains and a couple other records from Word of Mouth as far as that was kind of concerned, that could have had some other follow-up singles on top of that. But really, I felt like this album should have had like another song with Nate Dogg, should have had a nice summery kind of breezy song like Area Codes. Nate Dogg should have been on there. Ludacris should have done the first, second verse, one of the first couple verses on that song. Put Lil Fate and 2 Chainz on there, or even I-20, Shauna, just one of those folks could have been on there, and then that would have been another packaged hit. But the kind of concept, the two singles that were on this project really kind of sabotaged this project from having a lot of light, which I really feel like, for the most part, I just don't know of too many folks that regularly kind of recall this project, and it's just not brought up in everyday conversation. You go from Word of Mouth by Ludacris, which went 3 or 4 times platinum with 4 or 5 whopping singles on there, to Chicken and Beer in 2003, which had a number 1 and then like a top 5 single with Splash Waterfalls. And this kind of got the shaft in a lot of ways just because it just didn't have anything. This record really doesn't have any megaton single, which I felt like it probably should have had to help bolster it, and it probably would have went gold. Maybe it did go gold, which meant it sold 500,000 copies, but there's no hit single basically. So you're basically just getting this for being a hardcore fan of Ludacris, hardcore fan of 2 Chainz, or possibly just a hardcore fan of Disturbing the Peace, his label, Ludacris's label in general. So that's kind of the stuff to go in with. But the single from this project was Growing Pains Do It Again, which is basically a song off of Word of Mouth. It was kind of a decent song on there. I somewhat like the kind of mellow and kind of autumn-like hazy beat on Word of Mouth, but they really kind of made it more pop and put a sample on there that's really not that attractive, and there's just so much bad about this particular single. Lil Fate and Ludacris both recycle their verses from the Word of Mouth song, so there's really not much interesting about it besides Shauna and Scarface being on there. But the beat is just so ugly, it's just a chore to kind of listen to. I felt like if that was what they were hoping was going to sell records on this project, it just was not a pretty enough song to really do it. They totally, like I said, should have went with a more kind of summery and more like this breezy kind of song like Area Code, something like that, that could have really worked out. But it was just a missed opportunity big time. And then, like, crunk music was really starting to get popular. Things like Ying Yang Twins and Lil Jon were really starting to get poppin' around the fall of 2002. So they kind of tried their hand at doing like a Move Bitch type record and like a Get Low type record with like NSEW, which is north, south, east, west. It's kind of the sort of stuff that Lil Jon would do. It's very reminiscent of that, but is a very poor execution of it. I just felt like the verses didn't quite deliver enough in terms of the pungentness of what needed to happen for like a rowdy kind of crunk and club type number, which it was trying to be. I felt like Lil Fate pretty much was the one who delivered the best, but even he just didn't do a good enough job. Shauna, it'd be interesting to kind of see her on crunk. It's interesting, but it didn't quite have the makeup of a good enough pull to really do it. Maybe it was just the underwhelming beat, but I feel like the product of what the song was trying to be, it could have been good on paper if it would have had a more better kind of surmise of trying to do it, but it really didn't quite add up enough. And really, it's not too common to see how many folks would even know that this song was dropped as a single, because the first single barely charted off this project anyway. So the second single is just kind of like a uncharted second single. They at least tried, but obviously it didn't work. So that's kind of the thing. So those are the two singles. Really did minimal as far as promoting this project, and that's really why I feel like it's kind of a just it's kind of just like an afterthought, and just like if you're really obsessed with Ludacris, you look this project up and say, oh, hey, I didn't realize he was on this many songs with 2 Chainz, and a few more songs by Lil Fate, a few more songs by Shauna, that type stuff, just to kind of say as far as that actively kind of goes. But I'll talk about a few of the hits that I did like on this project. So I felt like it started off real well with Break Something. This was a better rendition of Crunk. Definitely felt like something that kicked ass more. I felt like Ludacris probably should have had another verse on here, but they all did pretty well. Definitely, like, I didn't like where they kind of added something to the beat when Shauna's verse came on, and it started happening more later in the song. But if it wouldn't have had that, I would have said that this definitely would have been, I mean, I still like the song, but it just kind of has like an extra thing starting with the second verse that kind of makes it a little scratchy. But it is pretty solid crunk song, I definitely would say. It's just interesting because this album is aware of crunk music and how that was kind of getting turned up and that type of stuff. So it does it a couple of times. But anyhow, Smokin' Dro is a really dramatic kind of smoking song. This just reminds me of like a car smoking song, not so much like backyard or in the club VIP smoking, as much as like I've got bills to pay. I feel like smoking anyways. I'm stressed out. It just is a lot more dramatic and kind of matured kind of version of like a smoking song. For the most part, I don't see as many smoking songs that really come about that feel that responsible, but they handled it pretty well. It was interesting enough to kind of have that, so that was a nice one. I felt like Pimp Council was a real clever rendition of being too pimpish with women, where Too Short was basically like the judge, and he was judging Ludacris, Shauna, and Lil Fate on acts that they did in the involvement of relationships and stuff, or what have you, and that kind of stuff. I felt like it really worked pretty well. I like, that's definitely something that hasn't happened in music that much. That was clever enough to kind of see that. That was another hit for Ludacris. So basically, all 3 of these songs have Ludacris on there. So obviously, I like the songs with Ludacris. But to talk about a song that had Ludacris on there that I didn't like, I really felt like RPM pretty much had one of the worst beats on here. Complete waste of a Twista feature, and I just couldn't really. It was so horrible. It really felt like nails on a chalkboard. I was really surprised at how bad. Like, I don't know why anyone would have thought that anyone would have wanted to rap over a beat like that. It really sounded like some of the worst type beats that Ludacris used to have from his Back for the First Time type days. It was really terrible. But I also did like the song "On Ya Ass." It's an outro. This is kind of a gimmick song, but Ludacris really knocked it out of the park. Interesting enough. Yeah, it just works extremely well. The beat's pretty thumping. This sounds like a real kind of megaton kind of beat, just burly and that type stuff. I like how they handled it. Every rapper kind of raps in like the gimmick format, but it is pretty solid. And they also include Move Bitch as a bonus track, which I wish that they would have done like another song like it, but still, it's a decent song for what it's a good song for what it is. So another person that I felt like had some scene stealing moments on this project was Lil Fate. I also felt like he had 2 songs on here where A-Town Hats and then When I Touch Down were both some pretty kind of flavored and kind of swag-induced kind of raps that Lil Fate seemed to be like one of the few other musicians on here that really showcased the hit potential. Like, I really didn't like I-20's Can't Be Stopped. It was trying to be so soulful, but the execution just didn't quite add up as far as that kind of went. I was kind of it really feels like I-20 needed to be on more songs like Move Bitch and Break Something. I felt like that was a better sophistication towards it. I mean, typically he's on the more like rowdy numbers. He's definitely a good crunk candidate, but it was kind of awkward trying to see him flesh out, trying to do Can't Be Stopped. I really felt like even 2 Chainz or Shauna wouldn't have worked on this. This felt kind of awkward to be on this album at all. None of these rappers are very soulful. So Posted was kind of trying to be like a club song, but it felt like more of like uh, trying to get into the club type song. Shauna really kind of underperformed. It felt like she was still trying to flesh out her hit potential. Now Shauna can drop club hits, but I really felt like the execution, once again, the product of what was trying to be with Posted was not quite good enough. It just, felt pedestrian, definitely felt really pedestrian for that type stuff. But, Shauna kind of delivers a mixed bag where every now and then, but she's not the getting some head Shauna or the damn Shauna from Block Music. She still had some fleshing out in terms. This is basically her debut project where she was in mainstream. So this is kind of where she first started popping up, apart from like What's Your Fantasy and that type stuff. So it's interesting enough, but it was just kind of a mixed bag from her. But yeah, 2 Chainz is on this album. It's interesting because he wouldn't really blow up in music until way out in 2011 and 2012, but he does have some hits on here, and he basically, I mean, he's not quite as scene stealing as he is in the 2010s, but it is to be sufficient that he was rich and was made and was at least making small attempts to be mainstream. Is just something to say that I would rather listen to 2 Chainz in his titty boy days more so than some other pedestrian rapper that still had more skills to kind of flesh out. So 2 Chainz is on here, but I really felt like the folk with the second most hit potential was Lil Fate, and it's really too bad that Lil Fate never really dropped an album. Just because I could tell by like the When I Touch Down song that I think he would have been a real pimpish version of like a rapper, probably a mixture between like T.I. and Ludacris in a lot of ways. I definitely would have felt like that would have been his vibes, making songs with Jazzy Faye and that type of stuff. I really felt like, yeah, it's just, I think that would have been a good rendition. A-Town Hats, Lil Fate did the hook. I will say that Lil Fate's not quite that excellent at doing hooks, but it's decent on A-Town Hats, and I really wish that Jazzy Faye would have done the hook for When I Touch Down. That probably would have worked a lot better, just because Jazzy Faye on songs like Let's Get Away with T.I. worked pretty well. That's what I thought when I initially listened to that song, that was what was going to happen, but it didn't. I mean, but Lil Fate did decent on When I Touch Down, so that's kind of the concept. Ludacris does have some good moments, but he doesn't knock it out of the park. Ludacris does have some good moments, but it's not quite as engaging as you might think. Like when you look at Eminem on Devil's Night, every single song that Eminem was on, damn near, it was scene stealing. It was like, yeah, that made you want to go out and purchase, but this is not quite as an immediate, go out and 10 or 15-degree weather to get this kind of concept as much as Eminem was with Devil's Night. Or the songs are good. Like, I definitely feel like Smokin' Dro is good, but it's not one of Ludacris's absolute best songs. And it's the same thing with Break Something. His verse on that song is so short, despite the fact of how good it is. It's a relatively short verse from Luda. Pimp Council is pretty good, but it's just none of these are really like must-haves in the Ludacris catalog, which is kind of disappointing. And that's another reason why I feel like he really should have had a hit single and been on it. I mean, that's just kind of what you do when you drop a compilation. If you're trying to put your artists on, you don't recycle a verse from an album you just put out. You make a brand new song and put one or two of the other featured folks on there, the person who has the most hit potential. I mean, that's what Eminem started doing in the Marshall Mathers LP days, is he was trying to put Bizarre on. And I feel like he probably should have went with trying to put on Lil Fate and then I-20, then Shauna, and so on. But it didn't turn out that way. I really feel like if I had to guess, if I had to put my 2 cents in, I would definitely say a song like another variation of Area Codes, or another variation of a song like Area Codes or Roll Out, one of those type beats. I mean, I know Ludacris had spare hits that he could have done from his word of mouth days, but it just was too bad because this was recycled, and the kind of failed kind of crunk song that they tried with NSEW was just not quite good enough. That's kind of the concept, but so I'll go ahead and say the 7 songs out of 13 I enjoyed because there are 2 skits on here. Really, there's only 12 songs if you don't count Move Bitch as like a song because that was already on Ludacris's album. So there's really only 12 new songs, 2 skits, 1 recycled song. So there's 15, but minus the skits and Move Bitch, there's 12. So I'll go ahead and list the one, I'll list the 7 songs out of 13 for you. So Break Something, Smoke and Dro, Pimp Council, A-Town Hot, A-Town Hats, When I Touch Down, On Ya Ass, and Move Bitch. So that's basically the concept there. I'm going to give this album a 5.75 out of 10 just because I liked what it was trying to do, but it's really underwhelming. And I felt like the execution of Ludacris was really kind of not up to snuff. I felt like, with him being in his prime, he just dropped a really damn near classic album with all those hit singles. He was all over the place in 2001 and early 2002, but he really kind of dropped the ball at trying to put on his crew more and give them a hit single that would have made this album go platinum. So that's kind of the concept. I felt like Lil Fate did a decent job, but he didn't really have the hit potential where he could have been on a song with Nate Dogg or something like that. He kind of was just more lazy with it. Shauna wasn't ready. 2 Chainz wasn't quite ready. I-20 wasn't either. He wasn't really doing the right type of hits. So that just kind of happens to be the concept. I just feel like it's just a giant missed opportunity that does have some good moments, but just does not quite deliver in terms of what could have been the unit sellers and that type of stuff. So 5.75 out of 10. The social score, I'm going to give like a 1 out of 10 just because it does have some hits on here, but both of the singles, in my opinion, basically flopped. And there's just really nothing that really attracts attention. There's really nothing that attracts attention on this project. I mean, you have to search for the songs that you want on your own. There's nothing like, oh, I know Area Codes, or oh, I know Welcome to Atlanta, or oh, I know Move Bitch, or something like that. There's just nothing really of that caliber on here. So it's basically just album cuts, and that's about all you get. If you're a hardcore Ludacris fan, hardcore 2 Chainz fan, or Lil Fate, if you know him that well, that's all there really is. But there's no hit potential. It's just basically an album of album cuts. So 1 out of 10 social. Really could have used one. I guarantee for the most part, most of y'all will probably think the same in that sense. But in terms of the future, Ludacris, like, he hasn't dropped an album since 2015. I'd have to say I don't know what Ludacris's next move is. I mean, it feels like he is just basically about like the Furious saga, and that's really about it. So it seems like Ludacris's chapters may be about complete. I mean, he's still dropping singles, but there's just not much going on in Ludacris's world right now. But this is, like I said, this is worth seeking out, but it's not as immediate and it's not quite as must have. It's just kind of low key. I'm just picking up 2, 3, or 4 hits, and then that's what you get from it. But just understand that it does have a small handful of stuff that may surprise you if you don't absolutely know about it, but it's just not scene stealing.